Computer. Great, that's cool, we got that. All right, good. Stop recording.
Say that I really appreciate being invited to come and participate today, and I view myself as being part of a broader disability rights movement, and I think it's because I'm older and I'm still here that, and I hope that the work that I'm doing in collaboration with other people is really helping us to advance our movement. And I wanted Emily to talk a little bit more about Rooted in Rights and a few other things that she's done, because what I believe is important about the work that we're continuing to do today is we're building off of the successes that we've had over the last number of decades. In saying that, those of us with disabilities and friends and families and others clearly understand that discrimination is something that we are experiencing every day. And that discrimination may be more significant based on your socioeconomic status, your educational background, your race, your religion. And one of the reasons why I really like Rooted in Rights because of the breadth of the work it's doing. And Rick also really hasn't explained the origins of the work that he's been doing, which has been, more internationally focused, also domestically, but also internationally. And I think it's important to really get more of an understanding of some of the important changes that are going on within our community to really be able to have a positive impact on change. The current pandemic that we're all going through right now, and Emily, as Rick said, has written an article about this, is of major concern, particularly for those of us with more significant disabilities who are really concerned that should we in fact contract the virus and need to go to the hospital, that our lives will not be considered equal to others. So Emily, why don't you say a word?
Thanks, Judy. So one of my favorite things about Judy, I have many, but she is always finding a way to amplify and highlight the work of other people. And I'm so lucky to count her as a friend and a mentor. And I think one thing that is so important to me is taking the lessons that I've learned from people like Judy and using them to help other people amplify their stories. So I'm the editor-in-chief of a website called Rooted in Rights, and we're a platform that amplifies authentic narratives and stories of the disability experience. So really it's all about storytelling. And right now with the pandemic, we are supporting a lot of disabled people to share their perspectives and the perspectives that far too often go unnoticed in the mainstream media, because mainstream media just consumed with ableism right now, unfortunately. And so it's especially important to me right now to help give people a platform to share what's most important to them. And it's people like Judy who have taught me how to do that, how to continually pass the torch and move things forward. So I'm just so excited to be here, and whether or not Judy will let me, I'm just going to sing her praises forever. So
And Rick, tell us a little bit more about positive exposure and its origins, because I met Rick when I was working in the State Department. I worked in the Obama administration, and I don't even exactly, I think I called him because someone was telling me about him, and he was in DC, and we met. And so give us a little information about your work.
I started out as a photographer, and I was a fashion photographer in New York City. I also lived in Milan and Paris. But I was always really frustrated as a photographer and as an artist because I was always told who was beautiful. As an artist, I don't see beauty just on covers of magazines. I see beauty absolutely everywhere around me. So I decided to use that talent and the influence and the camera and photography and portraiture to see beyond difference, to see the beauty and the richness in human diversity, to not try to fit everybody in within the parameters of the beauty standard, but to destroy those parameters, to see the uniqueness and celebrate the uniqueness, and use through the arts opportunities to really celebrate celebrate that difference, celebrate that uniqueness, to be seen and heard in a platform, and to see the beauty in your own absolute particular way, however it defines itself. And
Thank you.
thank you, Judy.
So there are a couple things that we were going to be discussing. One is the book, and the other is the film Crip Camp. Crip Camp, as Rick was saying, can be found on Netflix. It's 110 minutes. I think everyone that I know who has seen this film has really sung its praises. And as Rick also said, this was shown at Sundance. And just to give you a sense of how the audience felt about the film, it was originally supposed to be seen 5 times, and it was shown 12. That's because there were so many people who wanted to see it. And I think one of the stories that we heard from viewers was, why have they not known this story? Why do people not know about the disability rights movement? And I think there are many reasons for it. One, of course, is that there's not enough documentation that's publicly being shared, like Crip Camp is doing right now. But I think it's also in work that Rick and Emily and hundreds of other disabled people are doing, which is really allowing people to learn more about the stories of our neighbors who have disabilities, invisible and visible disabilities, people with psychiatric disabilities like depression or bipolar or anxiety, or people with hepatitis, or people with Down syndrome, or people with epilepsy or hemophilia or Parkinson's, or there are hundreds of different types of disabilities. At the end of the day, I think it's true, and Emily, I'd love your thought on this, that we're not really wanting to be identified so much by our label of disability, but being able to come together to discuss the barriers and successes, because I think we shouldn't just focus on the problems. We need to learn from the solutions. That the Crip Camp and my book and other books, I think, are very much showing what the problems are, but also showing and giving examples of positive change that's happening. And Emily, I think if what I like about work that Emily is doing is, in part, she's working on helping people learn how to tell their stories. And so I think today, I don't know how many people are watching, but I believe firmly that we need to be telling our stories. Not necessarily, all formally, but we need to feel comfortable in telling stories about our lives that we can talk with our family and friends about, allowing people to get a much clearer understanding of what does discrimination really feel like, and what does it feel like when you really are able to enter the world where having a disability is a part of who you are. People don't see it as something which is all consuming, just like we don't want gender or race or sexual orientation or religion or other things to be the all-consuming aspect of who we are. And Emily, you want to give like a few examples of work that you're doing, and Rick also, because you've been doing great work also with younger people, helping people learn how to tell their stories through photography. Emily?
Yeah, Judy, I think you're one of the people who I learned from that, we can embrace disability as an identity, and then we can use that identity to drive our work forward. And so, my dream world would be a world where I didn't have to, necessarily be this very public, out and about, constant teachable moment, if you will. I feel like I'm always a teachable moment. And I hope one day that that's not the reality, but right now the very act of existing in a disabled body seems to be this sort of political statement that we're making. And so a lot of the work that I do is really to try to get people to understand this idea that disability is not a bad thing, that we focus so much on disability as a diagnosis when really it's not about medicalizing it. It's about recognizing that society is putting these barriers in place and, you know, in so many ways disabling us. And that's not to say that the diagnosis is not an important part and that there aren't medical issues that accompany disability, but it is also to say that there's that social aspect to disability. And so I work with several different organizations in many different sectors, nonprofit and philanthropy, things like that, to help them craft messaging that educates other people about disability. I have this motto that if you want the world to be accessible to the disability community, then we can make our stories and experiences more accessible to the world. And doing that means telling our stories. And so all of the work that I do is really centered on sharing stories, on helping people know that they have the power to share their stories. You know, everybody says, how do I tell my story? Let's just start telling them. Let's just start telling them, and we'll all learn together in the process. And so I really appreciate, Judy, that you have shown people how important it is to tell your story.
I want to also say that when you look at those three of us today, so Emily is a proficient, competent, comfortable writer. When she talks the way she is, she's probably more on the introverted side, because she, right? For me, I am an extrovert, like off the map. So I'm like one who likes to speak a lot and engage with people. And then there's Rick, who I think is also, are you an extrovert, Rick? Or are you an introvert?
I think I'm an extrovert at times. When I have my camera in my hand, I get so excited. And when I'm playing and talking about kind of creating accessibility and creating visibility and a platform for so many of our friends, I'm completely out there. So,
See, I'm an ambivert. I'm right in the middle. Right in the middle.
I'm not. So Rick, give us a little bit of information about how you work with how you work on helping people express themselves through photography.
well, the only way, that's kind of pretty much all I know how to do is photography. So I use it as extensively as I possibly can to create the visibility, but to create really literally holding up a mirror to the person that's in front of me, creating a safe environment, but an environment where all beauty is seen, is embraced and celebrated. So it's creating that empowering moment, but that positive imagery, but creating opportunities to share those positive images, not just personally with our friends internally, but bring those publicly. Creating opportunities that these images, you can meet these beautiful faces and these gorgeous stories and hear these narratives, but you see these gorgeous photographs all face mounted on glass or plexi. So as you approach them, you see this gorgeous face, this energy, and you hear the story, but you're also aware of your own reflection. So the basic story behind this is it's never about them. This is about us. We're all in this together. This is us. This is all of us together. So it's creating every opportunity to really have new ways of seeing all individuals and to find that beauty that's in there, but really working with communities that are at risk of stigma and exclusion and it's usually through ignorance or lack of understanding, and through photography, you can show this image and all of a sudden you don't see this, or you see humanity, and you see life, and you see beauty and energy. And I think that's what sells us all. And that's what makes us all kind of so empowered and helps us move further and further and further closer to a more inclusive world.
Great. Are there any films that people can watch that you've made that they can get on YouTube or other places? Rick?
Well, we collaborated with Cartemplin Films that did, it was Cartemplin Films that did Hoop Dreams and The Interrupters, and we did a film called On Beauty. And On Beauty follows the story of positive exposure, and two of our amazing ambassadors. One is a young woman who has a birthmark by Ladau across her face, and she spends most of her time kind of doing, she's like a motocross racer, but she tries to cover up her beauty mark because she's afraid of what people will say and how they stare at her. And it's watching her journey to finally embracing that beautiful birthmark that's hers and uniquely hers, and how she has grown in her life. And the other is a young woman who has albinism or albino in Africa. And she started Positive Exposure Kenya, and she's creating opportunities to really kind of help the community understand and celebrate her albinism. And she won the Nelson Mandela Young African Leadership Award, and she took the film to the Obama White House as well. It won the Audience Choice Award at Chicago International Film Festival. So On Beauty is online. So thank you. And we have a lot of other films called Frame. Other films, and we created this series of films for healthcare providers in training that are forced to, in their medical education, they're shown these images of people with all these diseases and names of up against walls, naked in doctor's offices with black bars across their eyes. And Frame stands for Faces Redefining the Art of Medical Education, and provides an opportunity in medical training for individuals, healthcare providers in training, to hear about a certain condition, but as presented by someone that lives in that with that condition themselves or their family. So placing front row and center in medical education, humanity.
So, would you like me to read a little bit of the book?
Oh, it'd be exciting. I'd love this.
I know I would. I'm going to read along with you.
I'm just going to listen.
All right. So, I will read a little part of the book, which shows me as a young girl. I was 7 or 8 years old, and I had polio in 1949. So the backdrop, there were no laws at that time that protected the rights of disabled people, including being able to go to school. So at this point in time, I was not in school. I had a teacher from the Board of Education in New York City who came twice a week for an hour and a half to my parents' house. And this is a little story of how, when a friend of mine who was a little bit older than I was, we went around the corner to go buy candy. I think it was a beautiful sunny day, but it might have been cloudy. I don't remember. What I do remember was being caught up in my conversation with Arlene as she pushed my wheelchair, talking about what we were going to buy at the candy store or what we wanted to do later that day. We were pleased to be walking around the corner to buy sweets in front of Dr. Nagler's brick house, which I knew was Dr. Nagler's house because I'd been there with my mother for her doctor's appointments. We paused across the street. Arlene turned me around to lower my wheelchair off the curb, pushed me across the street, and then, once we reached the other side, she put her foot on the metal bar on the back of my chair, tipped me and the chair back, and lifted my chair onto the sidewalk. As we did this, a few kids came toward us from the opposite direction. They were walking slowly down the sidewalk. As they passed, Arlene shifted my wheelchair to the side to make room for them. We didn't know them and didn't pay much attention, engrossed as we were in our conversation. So I was surprised when one of the kids turned suddenly to look at me. He stood in front of me, staring down at me in my wheelchair. "Are you sick?" he asked, speaking loudly. I stared at him, not understanding. "What?" "Are you sick?" he repeated insistently. His voice boomed. I shook my head, trying to clear the words away. I was still confused, but couldn't speak. "Are you sick?" he asked, slowing the words down as if I were a toddler. The world went silent as the words reverberated in my head. I couldn't hear anything except those words. "Are you sick? Sick, 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 sick." I shrank down, frozen with confusion, wanting to cover myself up with something, anything to hide from that question. The boy's insistent eyes on me. "Are you sick?" he asked insistently, almost shouting. Suddenly, I became aware of Dr. Nagler's house behind me, and my face turned a cringingly deep red. Does he think I'm going to the doctor? But he's not my doctor, I thought fiercely. I fought back tears. I wouldn't cry in front of everyone. I wasn't sick. It made no sense. I knew I wasn't, but then why was he asking me that? I became uncertain of myself. Was I sick? I saw myself through his eyes, and the light around me shifted. Shadows emerged from the corners of my mind, previously submerged words, thoughts, and half-heard conversations tumbled into the glare of the spotlight. In a blinding flash, everything in my life made a perverse kind of sense. I couldn't go in this school. I couldn't go to that school. I couldn't do this. I couldn't do that. I couldn't walk up the stairs. I couldn't open doors. I couldn't even cross the street. I was different. But I'd always known that. It wasn't that. It was the world and how it saw me. The world thought I was sick. Sick people stayed home in bed. They didn't go out to play or go to school. They weren't expected to go outside, to be a part of things, to be a part of the world. I wasn't expected to be a part of the world. Abruptly, I knew this to be true, as if the knowledge had already existed for years throughout my entire body. I felt nauseatingly humiliated at the idea that everyone else had known this but me. Had they kept it from me? The embarrassment settled in as a cold ball deep in my stomach, where I could feel it spreading into my limbs. Was it a sunny or cloudy day? I don't know. I remember Arlene was pushing me. We were going to the store to buy candy, and we were chatting. And I was a butterfly, becoming a caterpillar. Yeah. So.
Wow, Judy, that's so.
Round of applause.
I think, you know, what's important about what I've tried to do in the book, Kristen Joyner and I wrote the book together because, as I said earlier, I'm better orally than I am writing, but I really learned a lot about writing working with her because we worked together a lot, and she would draft and I would comment and make written comments, and it also enabled me to become more comfortable in my writing. But if you can notice here, what I've tried to do throughout the book is to really kind of dig deeper into how I was really feeling. Because I think what's important is for people, disabled and non-disabled people, because our experiences are all different, is to really try to share the emotional, positive and negative things that are happening, because that's how people really get to know each other better, when we're not just kind of skating along the top. But you need, it's not easy to do, but I think it's quite rewarding when you can do it. Yeah.
Extraordinary. Beautiful. It's a beautiful excerpt. Just the whole book though reads like that. The whole is again, and I remember telling Judy when I first read the book, that I loved reading the book. It made me laugh, and then it made me so angry that at one point I threw the book, and then I ran and called the book. Hi Jorge, nice to see you, sir. Nice to see you. Great to see you. And it's this is our book, and this is our lady, and I'm so pleased. Emily, could you also talk maybe a little bit more about how you've been inspired by Judy? You did say that you were inspired, but
I use the word inspired.
yeah. I hate to inspired, so
I would say inspired in the right way, though.
Okay.
Yes, I know.
I would say inspired in all the right ways. The thing about Judy is, you know, I knew who she was long before she knew who I was. She was this sort of, you know, figurehead to me, and, you know, someone who I could look up to from a distance. And then I realized the thing that I love so much about Judy is that, you know, she doesn't make you feel like there's superiority in terms of generation when it comes to the disability rights movement, because there can't be. We need to be a unit. We need to continue the work together. And so for me, a lot of what motivated me is Judy's incredible outspokenness and willing to just take charge, get in a room, and get people together and get everyone as on the same page as possible. There's a joke that my mom makes, an old Jewish joke. If you put 10 rabbis in a room, you get 11 different answers. And I think it's kind of the same thing when you put 10 disabled people in a room, you get 10 different answers. And so I think the power that Judy has is to help, take those 11 different answers and combine them into something workable, into a unit where we can all, move forward together. And so that's what I'm really trying to do with my work now, is recognize that everybody's going to have a different perspective, and that's okay. And we should, because we're not just one person. If you've met one disabled person, you've met one disabled person. But I think that Judy's work shows what I hope to show with my work, which is that, even if we have different perspectives, let's find a way to combine those and work together to tell our stories and make a broader impact and really move the needle forward. So that's I could wax poetic forever, but
I think when people look at CRIP Camp, that's CRIP CAMP, you'll see very much that the stories of campers, and then as we're getting older and doing different things with our lives, are very intertwined. And that the work that was and is and needs to continue to be done typically cannot be done by one person. It needs to be done by many people. And even the formulation of what it is that we want to do needs to be done by many people, because as Emily said, you meet one disabled person, one disabled person. And when we're looking at some of the issues that we've dealt with over the years, like the formation of the legislation for the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 and other provisions of law, we've seen how it was essential for us to come together to really not only talk about the kinds of discrimination, but with Section 504, we needed basic things like, what's the definition of disability? What do you do when you're not going to be able to make every building accessible? What is an accommodation? On and on and on. So we're at a place right now where we've got lots of solutions. Partly it's helping make sure that disabled people know who they are, feel proud about who they are, and can really become more integrated in our societies as equal members of society.
It's beautiful, Judy. Working with so many of our positive exposures community, we have a very diverse community, but there's so many young advocates out there, and Emily being one of our great activists and advocates for human rights and civil rights and disability rights. What advice would you give to so many of our communities that are just forming their own skills as a public advocate, speaker, and game changer like yourself and like Emily?
Emily, you go first.
No pressure, right? So I think the best advice that I have for people is to feel the fear and do it anyway. And that's certainly not something that I came up with, but it is a quote and a piece of wisdom that I've internalized, because speaking up is really, really scary. And I'm not in any way a confrontational person. I don't like it. I try to massage a lot of my messaging to make it feel more, comfortable when we're having conversations. But sometimes conversations about disability rights and accessibility and recognizing that multi-marginalized people are especially dealing with oppression and ableism is not going to be a comfortable conversation. And when you feel that fear, when you're scared, keep going, because no one ever accomplished anything by not taking a risk and doing something that felt a little bit scary at the time. And so every time I am afraid, every time I feel like I'm just going to give up, I mean, I'll be totally honest, I'm writing a book right now, and looking at holding Judy's completed book in my hand is literally an exercise in like, I will get to the end of mine. I will get to the end of mine. And it feels scary. It feels really scary putting yourself out there like that. But, you know, to see that there are people who keep paving the way, and to know that you have generations of people behind you, you're not alone. You might feel like you are in the moment. You might feel scared. You don't know who to turn to, but you're not alone. So feel that fear and keep going.
I also think that it's important for people to try to meet other disabled people. And so, and that's not always easy. You know, looking in your community to see if there are organizations or an organization that you may want to go to meetings with. You may want to meet with people who have similar interests and begin to be able to come together to discuss an agenda for change, whether it's on voting or on planning in your city or transportation or personal assistance, whatever. You may want to look at joining your Centers for Independent Living, or going and becoming a part of whatever particular group that may not even have a disability focus, but because you want to get them to be able to start integrating disability. And I think another issue is social media. I mean, there's so many different groups out there that people can participate in. And Emily, is there a good way that people could be learning more about what they could be looking at in social media? Is there something, that a website they could go to, or a few places they could go to get more information?
100%. I think one of my favorite, you know, venues for where the disability community really does indeed convene and become a community is on Twitter. Even just typing in the hashtag disability Twitter will help you find a lot of people who have different disabilities who are having conversations, you know. And right now, especially, there is a lot of conversation going on around the pandemic. And so I think it's really important to, you know, go to the places where people with disability, they're having the important conversations. And something that we can post in the links afterwards, there is a person on social media, on Twitter specifically, who's at Tinu, Tinu, and they specifically collect a list of every disability rights hashtag that's going around. And I think that's a really great way to bring people together, you know, around a common conversation. And then, of course, there's a ton of Facebook groups. I really recommend those too, especially around the pandemic right now. There's a really good one that I recommend. It's, I believe it's called Amplifying Voices, National Disability COVID-19. So, you know, people are constantly finding ways to come together on social media, and we can't underestimate the power of that, especially not right now in this ever-changing virtual digital space.
Beautiful. Right. And celebrating in other ways and other opportunities, and across of course on the social media platforms as well, but going to Broadway and seeing someone perform on stage like Ali Stroker, who won the Tony, and I think that's a game changer as well. And we're constantly, like Gaten Matarazzo from the Stranger Things, but from the Cleidocranial Dysplasia organization, he's always writing into his script that he has to raise awareness about this particular condition. Or it's like there's all these new advocates, all these new ambassadors for change. And it's about harnessing them and empowering them. And what we do at Positive Exposure is try to do that through photography, through like our Pearls project, which is an online blog platform that our ambassadors get to talk about life from their unique perspective. But it's creating opportunities for all of us to be part of this dialogue. And also very important to include in that dialogue are non-disabled communities as well, to make sure that they're all taking notice and listening and paying attention and learning and being empowered by these stories and understanding. So I think the only way we're going to be able to really kind of create a more inclusive world where all differences are embraced is if we're in this together, holding hands virtually, but arm in arm. So I want to just thank you both so much for this. This is amazing. This is fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Any closing comments for you, Judy?
just thank you very much for doing this. For those of you who haven't seen Crip Camp and do have a Netflix subscription, I strongly suggest you look at it, I think, and share it. And obviously, I'd like you to buy the book, but at some point when the libraries open up, people are getting the book also through the library. So, you know, there are different ways. Kia Brown's book, Nadina Lespina's book, many others that are out there that you could look at, both memoirs and historical documents. And yeah, there's so many books out there. And keep the discussion going and do what Emily is discussing. Get on more of the social media and be proud of who you are. I think at the end of the day, we need to speak positively about who we are, what we have contributed, what we want to contribute. We need to be speaking up against concerns, legitimate concerns about what's going on with the possible failure of providing treatment for disabled people. But we also need to be looking at what's going on in education. Are disabled children getting the education that they need? Is this yet another excuse for them not to be getting the services they need? On and on and on. So thank you, Rick, very much. Thank you, Emily, and thank all of you who had the patience to jump on and off with us today. So hopefully we'll do it again. Oh, and also if you could go to the Human Perspective. I have a YouTube channel and would love to have you follow my social media.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Emily. Thanks. Thanks for coming.
Bye. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Emily, I'm going to call you. Bye.
Bye. Bye, everybody.